We're going to switch gears and move to how we think about the demand side. I'm sure all of you are following the headlines and the realities of how much AI and data centers are guzzling power. And we're very fortunate to have Dr. Coskun with us, who's really been at the forefront of thinking about, really for nearly a decade, I think, the opportunity data centers and AI may actually play in stabilizing the grid. And really the central question of, how do we power the AI revolution without breaking the grid? So really delighted to have you here with us so we can delve into this conversation. And would love to start, Dr. Coskun. Obviously, you're a co-founder, chief scientific officer of Emerald AI, one of the fastest growing early stage companies right at the center of AI data centers, energy, climate. But also you're a professor at Boston University and really have been a pioneering leader in the field asking this question. And your team has been studying this intersection for more than a decade. So we'd love to have you kick us off and kind of anchor our conversation on your foresights into the opportunity within data centers, but ultimately what market signals you saw just 2 years ago to partner up with your co-founder, Varun Severian, to bring your research actually to life as a company, launching it 2 years ago, and the rocket ship you guys have been on over the last, 16, 18 months, I think it's been.
Thank you. Fantastic to be here. And yes, so I started working on power flexibility in data centers a while ago, over a decade ago. And I'm a computer engineer. I've been working on energy efficiency and computing it as of different computing for a while, and data center was with my interest. And a couple of things happened moving from the research to the startup scene. And so, I mean, it's not a linear path. It's good to acknowledge that. Like, it's not like, 10 years ago, I saw the lights 10 years down the line and started working on it. It was quite like that. But it was cool research. I really like the idea that data centers could become more energy efficient, but also more grid aware. And this synergy, this intersection problem really piqued my interest. And eventually, a couple of things happened that moved this from the research scene to the commercial scene. And one thing was to realize that we can reframe the problem in a way that makes it attractive for data centers. So generally, on the compute side, for any computing system, to curtail energy, manage energy, the big constraint is performance. You need to deliver performance to the users of that data center, and unpredictability, arbitrary behavior in terms of performance. It gives a lot of understandable anxiety to users and to data. So we started thinking about it in a way that guarantees quality of service or guarantees performance to users of the data center. And another shift was that we did a prototype, research prototype, essentially implemented this on a cluster at the Massachusetts High Performance Computing Center. This was, AI was there, but it was pre-AI boom, I should say. Mm-hmm. So then we started working, though, and that led us to think, and it was together with a former PhD student of mine who is now an Emerald AI engineer as well. We started thinking about how to commercialize this, and this could work today. This technology could make data centers provide services to the grid, and they can get electricity cost benefits, and grid would get more flexibility and more resilience. And we thought, this argument was great, but then in our first running around, like talking to people, we got a lot of shrugs, like, we don't need to reduce it.
That was before the affordability hit the headlines from the election.
So that plus the AI electricity demand crisis wasn't there yet. So crisis is generally a bad thing. Like, we don't want crisis in our lives. But crisis is also an opportunity to do something. And this is exactly what's happening, because the AI electricity demand is creating so much delays in connecting data centers. Normally, you can build a data center in 2. Right Now we are talking about 5, 7, 10-year wait times because of the huge demand that this is beyond the utilities and the ISOs have ever seen. So then there is incentive to do something differently. So during this process, I met Varun Sivaram, our founder, and interestingly, he was thinking along the same lines, and we aligned. We started very fast discussing what we would do, and we joined forces and started building Emerald AI. So that's a short version of my story.
And that was just less than 2 years ago, right?
Yes,
Official launch?
Yes, I've been with Emerald since February, officially February 25. And Emerald was officially founded just like 2 months before that. So that's been the journey.
Yeah. Well, and just to put some numbers around what you shared on electricity demand, I'm sure most of you probably know this, but I think it's something like 183 terawatts of electricity that demand that the data centers are guzzling, and that's expected to double or triple between now and 2030. So obviously, and we like to, as investors, we always like to look for pain points, must have. So your point on crisis, I think, speaks to the acceleration you guys have seen in terms of interest of what you're building. In your TED Talk, which everyone should watch, I think that was last fall, really insightful explanation of what you guys are doing. But you talked about, you used the analogy of a symphony or an orchestra, and that data centers and electricity, the grid, you have lots of different instruments, and it can be incredibly chaotic. And without a conductor, it's hard to manage the chaos. So let's dig a little deeper and specifically to what Emerald AI has created in your conductor technology that is being adopted by some of the biggest players in this space. And I love that analogy. So I think it would be helpful for us technically for you to explain exactly how are you managing and providing power back to the grid.
So what we are building is a software solution to provide data center power flexibility, and it's called Emerald Conductor. And the resemblance, as Andrea is saying, a conductor and an orchestra normally have hundreds of instruments. Leave them be, it might be chaotic, but the conductor brings all of that into music. That's the analogy. And conductor, the goal of conductor is to have data center adjust its power consumption in a way that satisfies power grid. So what would that mean? For instance, it would mean the grid would be seeing a high demand period, hot summer day in Arizona, like for instance, we peaks now because sorry, microphone issue. Successful electrification of homes, residences. Now we are expecting winter peaks, for instance. So it doesn't have to be a hot summer day. There could be also other kinds of energy shortages. So, for instance, I believe New York State has a substantial portion of hydropower. In some areas where hydropower is in use, if there's a dry winter, the energy shortage is an issue. So, all of these can create peak demand scenarios in the grid. And the data center can respond to these within predetermined limits. For instance, reduce your power by 25% for several hours. And you need to do this for a certain number of hours a year. And within this kind of like predetermined program, so it's not arbitrary, data center can regulate its power. Now, what does Conductor do? Conductor on the data center side makes sure the data center's total power meets this power signal, if you will. Imagine power signal is normally not there, and like data center is running as business as usual. And at certain times, it's going to say, okay, now for the next 3 hours, reduce your power by several hours, by a certain percentage. Or it could be a signal that's more continuous. For instance, follow this power signal that's going up and down because of pricing, because of green energy availability and others. And the data center can do that. And Conductor has different components. One big component is the workload orchestration platform. So we actually regulate what's running on the data center in a graceful way so that nothing urgent gets hurt. Like if you're running some important thing on a data center, that goes through. But there's a lot of flexibility in data centers. There are things that are not urgent. There are things that can be slowed down occasionally or paused or moved to later, or sometimes move to another data center. So this kind of flexibility doesn't really exist in a lot of other users of electricity. Like if I go home in the evening and I turn on my lights, I want to turn on my lights. It's hard to convince me, like maybe turn on your lights at 3 a.m. Like that doesn't make sense. But with computing, you can do a lot of things like that, right? So, so Conductor manages all of the complexity. And one important thing to note is data center is not just compute. There are other things in the data center. There are batteries, maybe behind the meter generation, there's cooling, etc. So Emerald Conductor has also a holistic view of the data center and does this dispatch across different assets in the data center. So it's a software solution, meaning that it can be deployed to an existing data center or a future data center without waiting for other technological upgrades. And at the end, this is a harmonious situation. The grid requests a certain power behavior. You can consider it as a load shaping, like there's a load shape that the grid wants the data center to follow, and the data center can do that while catering the promised performance to its users.
And are data centers actually capturing, so you're selling your software technology to predominantly hyperscalers and data centers. Are they able to capture economics on giving that power back to the grid?
Yeah, so I mean, why is flexibility? I mentioned the crisis point, right? So, how does flexibility create value streams? So, everybody has to agree to this for this to work, right? So, on the data center side, sure, there could be economic benefits by doing this. There are already programs like demand response programs that have been around there, and one could subscribe to those and get better deals in terms of electricity bill. However, that's not the main driving force right now. The main value stream that's being created by power flexibility is early connection. I mentioned earlier that data centers are waiting multi-year queues in many states in the US as well as globally. And there's no quick solution to this. So you can say that I'm going to build my own power, but are you going to do that for every single data center? That also takes time. It takes a huge amount of money, right? So it takes permitting issues, etc. So there's no quick solution. Therefore, you can say, I'm investing in all these very expensive AI hardware. Should I wait for 5 years to get connected, or should I be a tiny bit of flexible, maybe percent of the time a year or something similar, and connect in a year as opposed to 5 years? So that's the big value stream for the data centers. Right.
And that takes us, I think you've been quoted on the $1 trillion wall, talking about, there's a $1 trillion opportunity with AI, but really a wall that we're hitting with a century-old infrastructure and regulation. And Emerald AI's pitch is often that you can kind of usurp or jump ahead the line of a 5-7 year wait in terms
Yes.
of, building out new data centers. Is the problem, is it technology? Is it regulatory? Is that what's been driving your tailwinds, that they can really demonstrate or quantify the positive flexibility that is impacting the grid? Walk us a little bit further through that value proposition for the data centers
Absolutely.
and for the grid.
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of whether there are technical challenges, I don't think there are any technical roadblockers, but of course there are things to do technically. That's why we have a company and we are building this solution with partners as well. But the real wall between what I'm talking about and making this for real, like implementing in data centers, is the regulatory process. So we need mechanisms. I mentioned there are demand response programs, but they've been not really attractive for data centers so far, except for some limited use cases for economic benefits. So we need time to power or speed to power to be realized in these processes, so that the grid side, the utilities ISOs, and the tech side, the data centers, data center providers, come to an agreement on what this is going to look like. And so how much flexibility, what's the condition, how many years, what's the economic benefit to both sides potentially. So this is the kind of regulatory framework that we need. And there's been a ton of development over the last year in this, particularly in Virginia, which is a hot zone in terms of data centers, in Texas. Also, we are seeing developments in California, in Midwest, etc. So there's a lot of development. So I'm hopeful to, to see more specific agreements, frameworks later this year, as soon as later this year, hopefully. But that's what we need essentially, because right now it's still like, let's do flexibility, but, then what, how do I get this time to power? And we started seeing some bespoke agreements, so that's good news, but we need broader frameworks essentially to make this happen.
And that tees up in the next question I have for you quite nicely on industry partnerships. You guys last month announced with NVIDIA, who's been a partner, and I think you're a fellow with NVIDIA, maybe a research fellow with NVIDIA as well. But NVIDIA and Emerald AI announced a collaboration with AES and Venergy, Nextera, I think several others, to pioneer a new class of AI factories that connect the grid faster, operate more flexibly on energy assets, and open the first power flexible AI factory later this year. Can you share more about this? Is really incredible to leapfrog, within 2 years, this type of partnership. Having invested in nearly 40 companies, this kind of a partnership is really very, very impressive. So can you talk about the highlights of this partnership? I think it probably addresses, I assume part of the strategy is coalescing the right players to get at some of these regulatory issues, and also being able to accelerate adoption for all of them, which is also obviously good for you guys. But talk a little bit more about that partnership, and also, what we should expect in terms of the adoption curve on these more flexible AI data centers coming online.
So great question. We are, first of all, grateful for all of our partners, and particularly NVIDIA has been both a technical partner and an investor and a supporter of Emerald AI. And these partnerships in this space is essential. So this is the kind of product that we are developing that we can't do alone. I can't just build it in my garage and sell it to everybody. It's data center commercial software. It needs to be safe, secure for adoption in data centers. There needs to be buy-in for various data center developers. And it's good to recognize that data center space is very heterogeneous. There are hyperscalers, there are data center providers, colos, and single tenant data centers, financial institutes running their own data centers, and so on and so forth, right? So generally speaking, and there are many vendors providing products to the data centers in terms of their electrical framework, in terms of their software stack, and all of that. So we do need partners to succeed. And this is not just for Emerald AI, even for big companies playing in this space. This is truly a you can't do it alone space, in my opinion. So with NVIDIA, like I said, we are grateful because this puts us forward in terms of really making this happen. But also there's this vision of NVIDIA that they are building AI factories, like replicable architecture for AI factories, like efficiently building, deploying quickly these data centers to respond to this demand. And our vision, together with NVIDIA, is to make these AI factories power flexible and make power flexibility be part of their template design. And this is a tremendous opportunity to more rapidly deploy power flexible data centers. So our timeline is, we are already collaborating, we are doing demos with NVIDIA, but our timeline is in Virginia, in Manassas, Virginia, later this year to, be operational in terms of power flexibility. And that's going to be a tremendous thing to show that this works in reality on a real scale, at scale data center. It's a 96 megawatt data center. So I think it's going to create a lot of opportunities, not just for that data center, but broadly for
proof points. Yeah,
for
very
building
exciting.
this more rapidly and more broadly.
Oh. Well, and on a closing note, because I know we're coming up on time, I'd love for you to address the equity question, and who pays. As an audience of social enterprise-minded, innovators, operators, students, talk a little bit about how you think about the distributional impact of Emerald AI's work in terms of, is this going to be, going to the benefit of just the data centers, or are consumers, electricity bill players going to actually see this benefit?
Great question. So normally, how we would do power grid is to, power grid supports all kinds of homes, businesses, etc. And then we would build it to raise its support on raise its peak essentially to accommodate large loads. Now, as we discussed, like doing that is costly, it takes time. It also creates this rush to avoid retiring coal plants, adding new gas plants, etc. And it's important to notice that energy infrastructure decisions are not quick decisions that we can throw away tomorrow. We are kind of locked in for decades, potentially, sometimes 30, 40 years into a specific technology. So what power flexibility through solutions like ours will bring is time to better build the grid. Like there are decarbonization goals, there are resilience goals. If you want to do everything in a year, it's going to be extremely costly, and it's not going to be environmentally friendly. So power flexibility will buy in time, so that we can. There are not only data centers waiting in the queue, there are green energy technologies also waiting in the queue. So adoption is not overnight. This is public infrastructure. It takes time. It takes money to build. So power flexibility can reduce this cost tremendously because we can make better use of what's available in the power grid today. Our power grid is not strained all the time. Otherwise, we'd be in trouble. It's strained only a small percent of the time a year during extreme weather events, hot summer days, cold winter days, etc., or during power outages, etc. So other times we have power, so we can much better use that power by having the large loads like data centers be power flexible and meet both the AI demand and also the renovation on the grid side together. So it's a win-win situation. And there's also the equity angle from a different perspective. So this is the power cost, right? So power infrastructure cost. How about the AI cost? If we make data centers substantially delayed, I believe that also delays and makes AI more expensive at the same time as well. So I think easier, earlier adoption of data centers without causing these very costly infrastructure updates also reduces the cost on the AI development side and makes it more accessible to society. So I think we can make much better use of our resources, build our grid. I mean, renovating our grid is an inevitable. We have to do it, but how we do it is going to have impact for generations. So we better do it right. And power flexibility, not only for today, but in the long run, gives us a better way for large loads like data centers to be better citizens, assets essentially, rather than energy hogs.
Amazing. Well, on that note, I think we're out of time. And thank you. We'll be eagerly watching your progress. Yes.